Okay. All right, I'll get started and then we'll just wait for other people to get on. They can come on in a little bit. But I just wanted to start out by having everyone take a deep breath. It's been a crazy last few weeks, months, crazy year. And I think these are the times when everyone's a little bit torn because, on the one hand, we don't have a lot of bandwidth, we don't have a lot of ability to. Um, have time for anything other than what is urgently important. But at the same time, we also know that this is the time to be getting things done and making sure that our families are taken care of. And, I was just talking to someone the other day that whether or not we do anything about planning for our families, things happen and emergencies happen. And so thinking about it or not thinking about it, planning or not planning, doesn't change the reality of how fragile our lives are. All it does is shift who has to take responsibility if something goes wrong. So I just wanted to commend everybody who is here live or is going to be watching this video later on, for being here and showing up and trying to get educated, to learn what the plan the state has for us. So I just wanted to start out by introducing myself. I am Kristen Wong, and I have been an attorney for about 20 years now. And I kind of knew, even before and during I was in law school, that I didn't want to be a lawyer. I had worked for lawyers again before and during law school, and I didn't like their adversarial attitudes. I didn't like their energy. I didn't like the arrogance, and I didn't want to be around that. And so, right after I graduated and passed the bar, I ended up going into the corporate world, where through a series of different jobs over the last 20 years, I realized in retrospect that what I was doing was explaining the law to non-lawyers, which obviously ended up being very helpful during all of this. Now that I am doing estate planning, and I just wanted to start out by putting my email address into the chat box, just in case anybody has any questions. And the other thing I wanted to share, which we'll be going over several times throughout today, I'm going to copy this, is a link to my webinar worksheet. So I just put that in there right now, and you can click on over there. It's asking for your name and your email address that you use to register for this. And basically, there are certain questions that we're going to be talking about throughout the process today. And you can just start checking things off as you realize that you need help. What it's designed to do is to help you figure out if there are holes in the plan that you have, or things that you might want for your family, to protect them now. And then the other thing, I'll be having you submit that before the end of our talk today. And I'll talk to you about how you can get some $250 off and $750 off of some of my services, that we'll talk about throughout. But let me know if you guys have any questions about that. But otherwise, we'll move on. So, okay, so I wasn't working directly as an attorney that whole time, but everything really changed for me it's been about 4 years ago now, when my younger sister Jackie passed away from breast cancer. And this is a picture of her and her family, and a picture of her from when she was a baby. And so she was sick for about 4 years, and she had stage 4 for about a year and a half. And we were all out. They were living in Ohio at that time. We were all out for a family reunion out in Ohio, and and she wasn't looking good. She was using a wheelchair at that point to get around. She had a lot of pain, and she had always had a series of issues going on. So we just assumed that was one more thing that she needed to take care of and push through, because she was definitely a fighter. And then, when we all got home, she asked me to come back to Ohio because she was going to be meeting with the doctor. And while I was at the airport on my way over, that's when she texted me and let me know that the doctor said that there's nothing more that we can do and that she should call her family. And sorry. And so, we all came back out, and that night, her husband came to me and said, "We don't have an estate plan in place." And I remember thinking back to law school, the minimum components of a holographic will, and trying to think how I could help him. And what he ended up doing was calling an estate planning attorney that they had met with like 2 or 3 years before, based on a consultation. He had given them some homework and asked them to just ask them to come back when they finished it. And life kind of got in the way, so they didn't come back. And so he called that attorney, who was luckily still in business and luckily available. He drafted some bare minimum documents that night and came by the next morning. And thankfully my sister was lucid at that time. And so I just remember seeing her with the attorney and his assistant in her living room, signing these, again, bare minimum documents that we didn't read. And we knew that good enough was going to have to be good enough at that point. And you can see from the pictures, like her kids were very young when she died. Her daughter was 7 and her son was 4. And yeah, we obviously wouldn't have wanted this for her, for them. But I think often that in one way she was lucky, which is that she had 6 days from the day that she found out that there was nothing more that they could do and the day that she passed away. And I think about all of us that, we all are kind of living our lives as if kind of crossing our fingers and hoping nothing goes wrong. And again, with everything, with everything that's happening right now, we've all heard stories of people not having enough time, and everything's fine as long as you're still alive and you still have the time to take care of things. And the problem is, again, we don't know when we're going to die. And so I have found that it's, a huge load off for my clients to, even though it's hard to face this, to be able to just take care of it and get it done, and then it's done. And but it's interesting because when I first started doing estate planning, I when I first started doing estate planning, I was just doing plans for new clients, people who didn't have any plans at all. And then maybe 3 or 4 months after I started doing trust reviews for people who already had a plan in place and they wanted to make changes. And the really eye-opening thing for me was that so far, I have not yet reviewed a plan that would have avoided the court process, which was shocking to me. Some people had, a handful of accounts that were missing from their plan. Some people had nothing named in the names of their trust. Some people had people they weren't talking to anymore named in all of the fiduciary roles. And so that, again, that was very eye-opening for me. And I want to share that with you because I think what usually happens is that people if they do take care of their plan, which most people don't at all. But if they do, what ends up happening is they, say, okay, I'm done with that. I can check that off my to-do list. Now I don't have to worry about, this ever again. And that's not how estate planning works. It's supposed to grow with you, grow with your assets, grow with your family. And, while, I try to draft all of my documents in a way so that my clients don't have to come back to do anything again. But there are certain times in your lives where you might want to make changes as your family grows and your children get older and more mature and you start to know their personalities, having grandchildren, it changes, and not to mention like sons-in-laws and daughters-in-law, it changes how your relationships. And so, like I said, I think it's really important to think of it in terms of um, always keeping it in mind so that you don't have to stress out about what it's going to look like at the snapshot of time when we all pass away. So anyway, with everything with my sister, I think um, I try just, and she wasn't just my sister, she was my best friend. And what I try to do is um, make something good come of her passing. And I try to be there for her kids. And obviously, it's harder this year. Usually, I'm going out there multiple times per year, and I haven't been out there since January. But I talk to them all the time. And again, we're just trying. I'm just try to think of things in a way that would be helpful for other families, so that they don't. We can't avoid all heartache in this world, but what we can do is try to avoid the unnecessary heartache. So, okay, I just want to start to get you thinking about, on a real uh, honest level, after all of this quarantine is over and we're actually able to go out again, if you're out on a date or out, to dinner with friends and you didn't come home that night, kids are with a babysitter or on their own, do you know what would happen if something were to happen to you? And I just want you to think about that for a little bit because I think we don't necessarily talk about it and we don't necessarily consider the pragmatic steps that need to be taken if something were to happen to us. So there are ways that I think two things that need to be addressed. One are the long-term needs of guardianship if something happened to our kids' parents, and then the short-term need. And I have definitely seen most estate plans address the long-term guardianship needs, at least marginally, and we'll talk about what that means in a little bit. But one thing I definitely have not seen in any of the estate plans that I reviewed is what to do on a short-term basis. And we're going to talk about that as well. So first, I wanted to talk about the long-term guardian issue, and again, let you know that there is a plan for your children, and the plan is that a judge will decide for you. And the problem is that we wouldn't necessarily want the plan that a judge would choose for us. And again, I think we all mean to document our wishes, but life gets in the way. And I have a client who she has her parents are still living, and she has a sister, and they all talk to each other regularly. But when we met, it was revealed to me that she absolutely would not want any of them to be guardian of her children. She had a very toxic childhood, and a toxic relationship with her parents and her sister. And so if something were to happen to her and her husband, if before we had done the planning, a judge would look at that. There were no other family members on any side. She ended up choosing friends that she wanted to have named as guardians. But if a judge is looking at this, again, it's not like she wasn't in communication with them. There was not necessarily an indication that she wouldn't have wanted them to be the guardian. And so I think about that. Like everybody has their own situation for what they would want. On the flip side of that, it's possible that there isn't anyone in your lives that you definitely don't want raising your kids. But what could happen in that instance, there could be an abundance of people who want to take care of your kids, any of whom would be fine with you, but with no clear direction, there there could be a fight over who is going to take care of your kids. And we don't want, I talk about this a lot in my client meetings, the concept of leaving a legacy. And we have worked our whole lives to build, reputation, to build these relationships with our friends and family, our children. And when we die, uh, one of two things will happen. Either we've taken care of everything, and even though there is obviously heartache and heartbreak for the grieving, um, there are systematic steps that need to be taken to take care of everything. And then our family members can go on with all of the wonderful memories that they have of us. On the flip side of that, if we don't take care of these things, then the memories get clouded by the pain and anguish that is caused by a mess that someone or people have to clean up. And I have had client cases where, especially in my trust administrations, where just tragic outcomes come from not having a clean plan. And the kids and the family members will never be able to remember their children, their parents again, without thinking of this horrible pain. And I don't want that for you. I don't want that for any of us. And so that's why I think it's really important to be clear about your wishes, to be clear about, making sure the documentation that you have is explicit, so that we can hopefully avoid the court process altogether. And then, again, the pain of death is what it is, but we want this transition between us being alive and our memory being alive to be as smooth as possible. Okay. So part of what I said we're going to do today is to talk about how to choose guardian. So the first step, and if you have paper and pencil or just you want to think about it, you can take care of that now. So I want you to think about the top 5 people that you might want to be guardian of your children. And I'll let you just think about that for a little bit. And these are some suggestions. You can do parents, siblings, friends, aunts or uncles, cousins, godparents of your children, nieces and nephews, or, college roommates. I think it's a really good idea to be very broad in who you are considering for raising your children, because this is obviously an important decision, and this isn't a decision that should be made thinking about what other people want. This is very personal for you. And so, and again, what I've noted over here, I don't want you to get caught up on figuring out the absolute best choice. Your goal is to come up with a list that is a better fit than either foster care or what a judge would choose for you. And so, hopefully by now you guys have a little bit of a list of five candidates that you think would be a good fit if something were to happen to you. Then the second step is think about your top 3 parenting values. And I made a list here because sometimes it might be important to have family members, or it might be important to have someone who has the same religious beliefs, someone has the same ethnicity or heritage as you, to be able to continue that on the heritage for your children. Certainly parenting style and values, and their age. If you're concerned about someone being too old to take care of your kids, that's an important consideration. Another thing which parents of older kids think about a lot is proximity to where you've built a life. Like when the kids are younger, a lot of my clients, they want family members to be raising their kids. And when their kids are in their teen years, they want their kids to have that continuity, that if something happened to our kids' parents, they don't want everything to be an upheaval. And so they might want to choose someone who lives in the area. And so one thing, so you can think about what your priorities are. Think of maybe your top 3. One thing I noted at the bottom, what I don't want you to choose is based on financial ability to care for your kids, because that is something that we should be taking care of ourselves. And obviously, it's great if we're able to do that based on our savings and our retirement accounts. But even if we don't have the ability to do that, a really important thing to do while our kids are minors is to sign up for term life insurance. And you can plan it for the amount of time up until our kids are 18, or maybe until they graduate from college, or roughly that age. And I mean, it is an insurance policy. So obviously, if it's a term life insurance policy, you don't, there is no payout afterwards. But what we're doing is making sure that if something were to happen to us, that we are not asking someone to carry the burden of raising our kids and also carrying the burden of financially supporting them. So I think hopefully knowing that and planning in that way will help you broaden up the amount of people that you would consider on your top list. And again, especially people who might be more aligned with your parenting values, but you're concerned maybe they have other children already, or again, if they don't have the financial means to help, that this is something, this is a strategy that we should be using to help, again, minimize unnecessary heartache if something were to happen to us. And then the next point is to match the short list with the parenting values. And hopefully that will help you have some clarity on who, what ranking you might want to choose people. And again, I think what is really important is to remember, because I think we all grew up, many of us grew up in households that relied on guilt for strategies of parenting. And so we carry that with us now, and thinking about, oh, these people will be upset with me if I don't choose them. That's okay. It's okay for them to be upset. It is not, they will handle it or they won't, but that is not a great reason to be choosing someone to raise your kids. Okay, so now I wanted to talk about the 6 common mistakes that I see when people are choosing guardians for their children. So the first one is choosing couples and not individuals. And, an example might be like you are very close with your brother, and so you name your brother and his wife. And, what if something happens to your brother before something happens to you, or maybe all 3 of you or 2 of you are in the same car together? And then it would be his wife being the only one left on this list. And it's very possible, maybe you wanted his wife to raise your kids, but maybe you didn't. Maybe the whole reason why you named her is because she happened to be married to your brother. And so it is and she might feel obligated to raise them, even though if you had thought about it and if you had kind of planned for it, you wouldn't have made set it up in a way where she would think that that's what you wanted. So on all of my plans, what I do is I ask my clients, do they want someone to be named jointly or the survivor, or do they want jointly only, and then go down the list? Like maybe you want to make sure that couples are named, and so you would choose one couple, and if they are not a couple anymore, you might go down to the next couple and maybe name your brother later on, so that at least he's named on there, but that it's clear that what your intentions are. So I think that's a really important thing to consider. The next one is not having enough alternatives. And so about 3 months before my sister passed away, I was out in Ohio and we were just having a heart to heart. I remember she was telling me that they were not coming home from Ohio. And one thing she said that just was emblazoned in my mind, she said, do you have guardian's name for your kids? Because if you don't, you should. And as soon as she said that, I realized, I did have guardian's name for my kids, but she was my number one choice. My parents were backup. And, at the time that I had named, guardian, my kids were, babies. And so, my parents were much younger then, and my parents are in their mid 70s right now. And I realized that it's very possible that even though I had named guardians, that I would end up with nobody named. And so I think that's a really important thing to think about, is to come up with a list that's long enough, because again, there will be someone named for your family. The question is it going to be someone that you choose or someone that a court chooses? So I think that's important to keep in mind. The next one, as we talked about, is considering financial resources when naming guardians. And the other thing I wanted to talk about with this is not just making sure that you have term life insurance or enough savings to raise the kids. And honestly, what I recommend is doing a mathematical calculation of how much you think it would cost to raise your kids up through, again, either age 18 or through college, so that you can have so that you can adequately prepare for how much money you'll need. And obviously, it is a little painful to find out how much that is, but again, the facts are what they are. Reality doesn't change just because we didn't plan for it. So that's one part. The other thing, which I think is really important to know, is that it is possible to name a financial guardian for your kids separately than naming the guardian of your children. And so I think there are some people who, for example, like you trust your sister or your best friend implicitly, and they're great with money, they're great with kids, it's going to be perfect. But not everybody has that scenario. And so I think that it is important to know, again, that you can separate those out. So someone can be in charge of the money and then give the money to the guardian. You might think, my sister's not great with money, but she is excellent with my kids. Someone else can be helping her manage the funds for her kids, your kids, so that you don't have to worry. She doesn't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about that. And again, it's a way to make sure that you get the best of everything instead of trying to settle. The whole point of all of this planning is to get, obviously, first choice would be for us to get what we want, which is to stay alive. But the second choice after that is to make sure that we can control as much as we can before we pass away, so that everything is very clear for everyone and it goes smoothly after we do. Okay, then the next one is forgetting to exclude undesirables who might challenge. And this reminds me of what I was just telling you a few moments ago. When I ask this question, when I'm in my design meetings with my clients, most people don't have anyone that they want to exclude as guardian. But there are absolutely some people who, for very good reason, or even not, it doesn't even have to be a good reason. It has to just be something that you want. You want to make sure that certain people do not try to contest your nomination of guardian. And again, the reason for this is that, again, my client was a perfect example. I could definitely see the courts being very curious about the fact that why did they name individuals who are friends instead of family members? And the family members can show that they were tightly knit, and they all got together, they all talked to each other. Again, everybody's situation is different, so it's not cookie cutter, but it is very important to consider that the people who, it's usually family members who would be in a position to contest your nomination. What I do is I create what I call confidential exclusion of guardian. And I do a separate one for each like couple or individual. And so what I do is I draft it, I have my client sign it with the formalities. And then when I give the binder back to them, I suggest that they take those documents and take them out of their estate planning binder, because it is not designed to get in a fight with anybody. It is not designed to shame anyone. The only way that these documents will come to light is if one of those people decides to contest the nomination. In which case, I put a notice in the binder in the documents that says that I have extra documents that are discussing guardianship. And if something happens while the parents are of kids who are still minors, please contact my office. And again, what I do is when I give the documents back to my clients, I say, I recommend taking this out of the binder, out of your house, and giving it to a trusted friend. Because again, and I just had a client sign over the weekend who had 6 different sets of people that were family members that she wanted to make sure did not try to contest the nomination. And again, so what we did was we did 6 different documents, because there's no need to drag everyone else into this. And it because the document includes explanations for why you wouldn't want these people to be guardians of your kids. And so if they contest, then I go to them privately and share the document with them and show them what will become part of the public record if they decide to contest the nomination. And usually that would be enough to the documents are designed to embarrass them. Obviously, it's possible they might still contest, but for people who have legitimate, strong reasons why they would want someone not to be guardian of their kids, I think it's really important to document that. And so that's one of the things I do in my practice. And then the sixth thing that I see is forgetting to name short-term guardians. So I just wanted to, again, come back to, if after all of this is over, you end up going out one night, kids are at home with a babysitter on their own or on their own, and you didn't come home, what would happen? And so you can give your phone number, you can give the neighbor's phone number, but I think it's important to know that by law, if something were to happen to you and the police come, the police cannot leave your children with someone who is not a family member. And there's a liability with leaving them, even if it was a babysitter, even if you had a really close relationship. And so they need someone who has the legal authority to take your kids in order for them not to bring your kids into child protective services, even temporarily. And again, this depends on the scenario, because I have one client I'm thinking of who had, gosh, I would say 30 or 40 family members who all live within her neighborhood. The likelihood of them not finding someone who is awake and available to come get the kids at that point is pretty minimal. But most of us, especially here in California, we have we don't necessarily have family members who live nearby, possibly not even in the same state. And again, if we're out at night, most people don't necessarily have their phones right next to them that they would hear ringing in the middle of the night. So even if there were people nearby, we still run the risk of not being able to get a hold of them until the next day. And I think when I realized that this was a risk, when I first started, looking into doing estate planning, it terrified me to think of the fact that if something were to happen to my husband and I, and we died, to have our children find that out, and then have the additional trauma of moving in with a stranger and again, just even temporarily, it doesn't matter, them not knowing when they're going to see uh, any sense of normalcy again is another trauma on top of that. And again, what I'm trying to do is help us avoid unnecessary trauma, and so for our kids. And so that's why what I do is, for all of my planning, I have, usually people have guardianship nomination in the will, which is obviously important, but the problem is the will doesn't kick in until you die. So if you haven't passed away, that's not binding yet. So I have a standalone long-term nomination of guardian, and I also have a short-term nomination of guardian. And so it's basically people who live within 20 minutes, people who your kids love and would be a comfort to them, people who would likely be available. And so I send them a copy of this document. In general, I don't send copies of other documents because I don't I don't want other documents to be out there, but this one is important because they need it. They need to be able to show the police that they have the legal authority to take your kids. And obviously, you put people that you trust. What I do is I put the phone numbers for all of them on there so that it's kind of like a phone tree. So I always suggest, for example, putting a neighbor on there, putting friends, parents of kids who parents of their friends from school. And so sometimes maybe the neighbor might be the first one to find out there's a problem if they live next door, and to be able to contact other people on that list and have their phone number. And, first of all, it's very possible and hopefully we will never need this document. But what I try to do is minimize the risk that there would be any issue with the kids having to go into child protective services. And the other thing I do is I create instructions for the babysitter on who to contact. I also put my contact information on there in case there's anything that goes wrong. And then I also give the parents, my clients that are parents, ID cards that are basically kids protection planning cards that they put in their wallet, that lets them know, hey, I'm a mom, I'm a dad, I have minor children at home, and these are the people that you should contact to make sure that they're taken care of. Okay. And then the other part and this part is, so I guess I'll just tell you this story. When my sister, she knew that she was dying. And so she had created these videos for her kids of, like when for them to see when they graduate from high school, when they get married, different stages of their lives. She wanted them to be able to, feel connected with her. But it was really interesting to me because she actually wasn't the one that told me about it. It was her husband who told me after she died. And I remember thinking, if something had happened to him, there was no way that I would have known to go looking on her computer for these important files. And I think all of us, if we had to choose between, our financial assets, making sure those are preserved for our children, and the connection that we have with them, a lot of us would choose that connection. And so what I do for my clients is, after we've gotten all the paperwork and the making sure the assets are taken care of, I have a final step in my process, which is doing a legacy interview. And part of that is because we live in a really scheduled society. It's like, okay, it's time to wake up, it's time for breakfast, it's time to go to school, it's time to do your homework, it's time for soccer practice, it's time for bed. And we don't necessarily talk to our kids about the things that are really important to us on a regular basis. And even in those times that we do, we don't know if they're listening to us. We don't know if they're hearing it. And so the recording that I do is a way to memorialize the things, our values, the things that are important to us. Here's some of the questions that I ask, about our childhood, and what our thoughts are about money. How do you want your family to remember you? And part of the reason I do this is if something were to happen to us when our kids are young, this serves as a security blanket for them to hear our voices over and over and hear us telling them how much we love them. And then, if all goes according to plan and we all live long and healthy lives, this ends up being a family heirloom that can be passed on to our grandkids and great grandkids. And I think about how amazing it would be to have something like this from our great grandparents or ancestors to hear about their childhood and about the things that were really important to them. So that's just one of the other ways that I try to keep kids in mind while I'm doing my planning. So that is the planning for the care of our children. Then I just wanted to briefly go over the financial planning because I think this is also important. I just wanted to let you know, I don't know if any of you have had experience with probate, But basically, probate, as you can see from the quote down below, probate is a lawsuit that you file against yourself with your own money after you've died for the benefit of your creditors. And I think for your creditors is the most important part of that, because the court, if we don't have a plan in place, the court has a plan. It's called the probate code. And again, their emphasis is on making sure that our creditors are made whole. But the problem is, they don't know who our creditors are. And so they give creditors, potential creditors, ample opportunity to make sure that they can lay claim to any of our assets before our children or our family members receive them. And, if someone has, tons and tons of money, you might be able to petition the court to request some of the money to go towards things like the mortgage and school and food. Otherwise, it's not like the courts will definitely say no, but the family is in a much lower position than, again, any potential creditors. And so I think that's really important, to make sure that our family members financially are taken care of. Again, talking about leaving a legacy and making sure there's continuity between them knowing about or having fond memories of us in our life and having fond memories after our death. The other thing I want to point out is there are a lot of fees involved with probate. So there's attorney's fees, executor fees, appraiser's fees, bond premiums, creditors, paying off the creditors, filing fees. We'll talk in a minute about what those numbers are, but it is a very slow process. It takes, I would say, 12 to 24 months. But if you think about, well, even right now, like the fact that the probate courts had to pause, there's going to be a floodgate after that. But also, if you look at the demographics of the baby boomers are just starting to reach the age of average life expectancy, there's going to be, again, a bottleneck because there's only so many courthouses, there's only so many judges, and there's only so many courtrooms. And so I think that time frame is going to drag on much further. And I just wanted to explain how probate fees are calculated. So if you own a home, they do not look at the equity that you have. They look at the fair market value, which means even if you have zero equity, they are looking at what the house would sell for right now in order to be able to calculate the probate fees. And then I added some things in here. Rental properties, same thing. Stocks, bonds, and bank accounts, they look at the value of those accounts. Business interests as well. So life insurance policies and retirement accounts are treated differently. Those usually go by beneficiary designation, but if either you don't have a beneficiary designated or a minor ends up being the recipient, either as the primary or the contingent beneficiary, that gets brought back into the court process through conservatorship, where someone is paid, their hourly fee to be able to manage that money for the kids until they turn 18. And so that ends up, again, being brought back in. So in my example, the value was 2 million, and the approximate value of the estate, they look at 5% of whatever the gross estate is in calculating the total of the probate fees. And it's not necessarily going to be this amount, but it very well could. So that is $100,000 based on the $2 million evaluation. And the way that I describe that is basically holding this money in front of your family after you die, and then lighting it on fire and saying, you're never going to see this. Your parents worked very hard for this, but you are never going to see this money. And one thing I wanted to point out is not everybody has a $2 million net value. Can you imagine someone who only has $10,000 and then they pass away? Their family desperately needs that money, and they need for it to not be going through probate in the court process. The other thing I wanted to point out is that there is a Department of Unclaimed Property in every state, with funds that were either if someone passed away or they moved and they didn't realize that they had this money. And there is over $9 billion in the Department of Oh, shoot. I forgot to turn this off. So sorry. And so, sorry about that. So $9 billion in the Department of Unclaimed Property, and that is money that we hope that our kids would find out about. So what I try to do is I create a spreadsheet for all of my clients to keep updated throughout their lives, so that, again, making it very easy for whoever has to handle things after you've passed away. And I have two trust administrations I'm doing right now. One was my client, and she had passed away last fall. And she, we created the spreadsheet. It's been very easy to go through the steps of transferring everything over into her trust, and managed. And then the other one was someone who had intended to meet with me this year, right after a surgery that she had, and she ended up passing away. And so it has been very interesting to compare these two trust administrations, because it is very difficult. And we are every week or every week and a half, we're getting information about different small accounts and different things that are coming through. And again, it's very stressful for the person who has to take care of all of these things to not know what we own. Okay. And then I just wanted to show you the last will and testament of Whitney Houston. And this is just an example. You can go online and find out, celebrity wills. There's a lot of information. And the reason I show this to you is because I can. Because when you have a will, they have this very corny lawyer joke. It says, where there's a will, there's a probate. Because just having a will actually guarantees that there will be a probate. And this is also the case if people have trusts, but they have not put enough of their assets into the trust. That will also create a probate. And of course, if you don't have anything in place, it creates a probate. And what I'm pointing out here is the public nature of it. Because if something happens to you and you do not have protections in place, your anybody can go down to the courthouse and find out exactly what you had, and find out who your kids are, and look them up, and potentially take advantage of them. If something happened to us when our kids are minors, they will be getting all of this money outright at age 18 without restriction. And I used to talk about this in the theoretical, like, can you imagine what would happen if your kids got your money outright at age 18? And I had a client who said, yeah, that's exactly what happened to me when my dad passed away when I was 10, and I inherited money from him, and I got it at age 18, and I snorted it all up my nose. And so obviously we don't want that for our children. Luckily she ended up landing on her feet. She's married, she has kids. But if we can avoid this, we definitely would want to. So I just wanted to recap that if you don't have a plan in place, or if you have an incomplete plan, it will result in probate. And probate is expensive, up to 5% of the gross value of the estate, time consuming, 12 to 24 plus months, public, and most importantly, completely voluntary. And the way that we avoid the court process is through a fully funded living trust with disability provisions. So we make sure we create this trust, which is basically a contract explaining how we would want our assets to go if something were to happen to us and we can't sign our name anymore. So we retitle all of our assets into the name of the trust. Any real estate, bank accounts, we assign everything into the trust. And this is and then we can make the life insurance and retirement policy beneficiaries the trust as a beneficiary. And I definitely recommend doing something like that in general when we have minor children involved and we don't want them to have access to that money outright. And we can say when we want the kids to have money. We can say what we want the money to be spent for. The most important thing, again, is that I think about the fact that we have 12 years of compulsory education in our country, and we didn't tell people how to avoid this for our families. We didn't tell people, teach people how to, what happens when we get older and when we die. I think it's a tragedy that it is so hard to find this out, and most people find it out the hard way. So that's why I wanted to share it with you, because I want you to arm yourself with information, because whether or not you know it and whether or not you face it, the reality again is what it is. So again, I just wanted to briefly recap the steps to a kids protection program. Kids protection plan is first to choose the long-term guardians using the three-step process we talked about, to document your choices, to choose the right short-term guardians for friends and family within 20 minutes, and then to document those choices, to give your short-term guardians the legal documentation and instructions of what they should do if something were to happen to you, and give the caregivers in the school instructions on who to call. Carry the family ID card that I give you in your wallet, so that if something were to happen, the police would have that information. And to tell your long-term guardians what to do if they're called upon, and where you keep your guardianship documents, and give them specific instructions. I have a questionnaire that I have my clients fill out about how you would want your kids raised, and the values, the insights, and the stories to be able to continue on without us. And again, making sure to exclude anyone that you know you wouldn't want challenging your decision, and to create a plan with term life insurance or savings. Make sure you're set up with a living trust, and make sure that all of your assets are owned in the name of the trust, so that there are obviously trust administration fees. There are fees that have to be paid when we pass away, but it is much better for our family members to be negotiating with creditors from a position of power than from the bottom of the barrel. Like, if something happens to us, a lot of times the creditors, especially bigger creditors, might say, I don't want to have to deal with this. I don't want to have to fight. I don't want to have to wait. We don't want to have to wait for our money. We will negotiate, and we are willing to take less. So that's really important to know as well. So this is my first gift to you tonight. This is a link, and let me write this in the chat box too. A link to, whoops. It is a link to the Kids Protection Planning website that I have set up, so that you can name your own guardians. So now that you've gone through this list, this is a way to document your wishes and to be able to print that out. So for some of you today, it is possible that that's all you need. Maybe you just need a guardian named, and that's great. I'm happy to be available to offer this service to you. But for some people, it is possible that there are other things that you want to take care of, and you're realizing the ways that your family is exposed. And so for those people, I offer planning packages to help them with their documentation. And, again, doing the trust administrations and other trust reviews, what I have seen in the past is a typical experience. It's sort of like transactional. They create these form documents, fill in the blank, and, set it, forget it. That type of planning, as I have found, doesn't help your assets stay out of the Department of Unclaimed Property. The documentation may work, it may avoid probate, but it may not. And it, depending on the clarity, it will likely not keep your family out of conflict, which is, again, what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to have happy, positive memories for our families. And again, it may leave our assets to heirs unprotected, as we just talked about. And again, it doesn't adequately protect the kids, especially any kids that has anyone who has minors. I have not seen a plan that adequately protects the children in that way. And I just wanted to kind of contrast that with the experience working with me. I do all flat fees. So you choose a fee, so there's no surprises. And I have some clients who they send me emails like, okay, so it's okay for me to just ask this question, and it's okay for me to ask this question too. Like, they are so used to lawyers having hourly fees that they have to pay. And so this is a way to make sure that I don't want money to be a reason why you don't ask me more questions. And so I definitely encourage all of my clients to reach out to me with any questions they have, because I want their plan to work. So that's why I set up the flat fee model. I try to protect the kids totally, completely in the immediate and the long term. And again, go through an entire process of thinking things through, of potential issues that might come up, to try to minimize the chance that your family would be in conflict or in court about any of this. And I just try to offer you peace of mind of knowing that you've made the right decisions by educating you while we go through the process. And again, with the things that I do, that again have not as much to do with the financial aspect, but the legacy aspect of estate planning is passing more than just money. You pass on your values, your stories, and your legacy. So, like I talked about at the beginning of the call, I have the offer for you guys to get discounts on my planning packages. The way that I start is with a family wealth planning session, and generally I charge $750 for this. But for anybody who's attending this call and is coming pre-educated, I waive that $750 fee. And so I have 3 levels of planning packages. I have a will-based plan for it's mostly for people who have minor children and don't necessarily have assets, or they want to make sure that their directives are taken care of. I have a trust-based plan, and I have advanced trust planning with asset transfers, and it includes all of my plans include will, HIPAA waiver, healthcare directives, power of attorney, the guardian nominations, all of the kids protection planning, and the legacy interview, and the asset spreadsheet. And so I just wanted to also let you know I have a complete virtual process. I've had that for several years, but it really kicked in. Um, I went from maybe 10% virtual to pretty much 100% at the beginning of or just in March. And we're slowly starting to, so far, most everybody's been still wanting to do the virtual process. So it gives people peace of mind for 2 reasons, because then you don't have to expose yourself, but also then you don't have to leave your house. And then I also offer payment plans as well, because I know that it's difficult sometimes to, especially in these days, to make sure that we have enough money to be able to protect our families. And my promise is that whatever the fee, I guarantee that the value will be at least the fee that is paid, if not, and likely much, much more. And so I would say the number one reason why plans fail is procrastination. And it is really important to remember that intending to complete a plan is 100% different than actually completing a plan. And again, my trust administration that I'm doing right now, we've been talking for several months about meeting up, and she wanted to wait until after her surgery. And even people, if they're not having surgery, there's accidents happen, things happen, life is fragile. And so my goal is, since you are here, you took the time to be here to educate yourself, and I want to help you with the procrastination aspect. So again, what we just talked about, one of the things was the giving you the $750 off of the family wealth planning session. So that planning session is free. I have my clients complete some homework, which is actually in itself really helpful. And then to get financially organized and to start thinking about these things. And then if we decide it's a good fit to work together after the family wealth planning session, during that session, I offer, if you schedule an appointment today, I also offer $250 off your plan. And even if, like, I know it's 9 o'clock at night, even if you want to just email me and tell me, I don't have my calendar right now, or I'm going to bed, but I want to get this done, then take advantage of that. That would be enough to be able to take advantage of this. And again, the reason I do it is because you're very motivated right now, but once we jump off this call, it's going to be, less, like life gets in the way. And by tomorrow, it will be a little bit less urgent And we all know that we need to take care of this. And again, it's very possible that all you needed was the guardianship, and that's great. I'm really happy for you that you are able to take advantage of what I presented today. But for those people who might want extra planning, I'm making this available. So again, the steps are to either email me with the email address I gave you in the chat box, to complete the online worksheet that I also linked in the chat box, to schedule today or email me today to receive the $250 off plus the $750 off, and to use this $1,000 gift to ensure that your family is taken care of for a lifetime. All right. I know we went over a lot. I know it's late. I want to be available if anybody has any questions. So I'll stay on for a few more minutes, but I just wanted to commend you again for being here today, because I know it's a lot to think about and it doesn't feel good. And I hope that what I talked about today was really helpful. So I'll stay on, but if you have any comments or questions, just let me know. I'll stay on for a few moments. Oh, I just got a message. All right. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate that. Okay. All right. It looks like there's no questions. And again, this was a lot to digest. So, again, thank you very much for being on. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions at all. And I hope to chat with you soon. Okay. Have a good night, everybody. Bye bye.